Hey, welcome back, Banditos, to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits on this Wednesday, May 25th. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Oren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And this is the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. And today, we have the pleasure of bringing to you our interview with a duo. Another duo, guys. And this duo is none other than Howard Mackie and Terry Kavanagh. Now, I know them as the architects of the Clone Saga, which was a pretty big deal in the Spider Universe, which still has some relevance today, where they brought back Ben Reilly as a part of a new series. So I know people have issues with that series over the years. I know it got a little convoluted. It was a fun ride, though, despite what people think of the ending. But these are the guys that brought it to you, and it was great talking to them.
Yeah, I think I don't want to ever, place numbers on things, but this is probably my number one interview that we've done. I love talking to these guys. They're so much fun. There's such a friendship between the two of them, and the stories they told are absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, I hate to unbalance the two, but I am a little bit more familiar with Howard Mackie's work, especially with introducing the new ghostwriter Danny Ketch in the 90s when we were sort of at the height of our collecting prowess, but also his team-ups between Punisher, Ghost Rider, and Wolverine. Hearts of Darkness, the other sequel, I can't quite remember at this point, but those are really great books. JR on art. And Terry has done, quite a bit on his own as well, but put them together. And at least according to Oren, which is a solo gig, it was a combustible conversation. So let's get to it. This is Terry Kavanagh and Howard Mackie.
Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure.
Now, my first question is, how did this friendship start? How did you guys meet? How did this all come together?
Friendship.
I'll take this, Howard. Howard was desperate for companionship and just followed me around. There's nothing I could do.
That's pretty much right on the ball. Yes. I'll go next.
Okay.
Sure.
I'll be serious because I'm the serious of the two.
Makes sense.
Terry and I mean, we were, I think I can speak for both of us, very fortunate in the time that we came into the business. We started out as editors right around the same time. That was a joke. Wait a minute. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable, so we'll just be aware of that.
Gotcha.
It isn't just your internet connection.
Yeah, you are correct on that. But no, there were a group of us that were all assistant editors at the same time, and we quickly established pretty fast and long-term friendships. And the most obvious ones, I think, at the time were myself, Terry, Bob Harris, who you may have heard of, and Bobby Chase. And we were all assistants at Marvel in the 80s. And we, when you're in Marvel back then was a very unique environment. We really became good friends with everybody we worked with and did everything together. I mean, we went to bars and concerts and we just hung out. Everybody was at my wedding and and all that. So that's how it started.
We were all people with a shared passion. That really was what it was. And so there was that instant bonding. And then we were mostly likable people.
Most of us. And that shared passion was not comics, just so you know, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, Howard was a plushie.
Well, okay. I said we weren't going to get into it.
Oh, my bad.
That's the title right there.
Yeah, yeah, that's my memoir.
Yeah.
Howard was a plushie.
And you guys, you were there. Started with the Mr. Shooter in charge, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Or were you guys there before you started? Okay.
No. I was an assistant editor while Jim was the IC.
Okay. And I also want to get into, you guys, work together on Clone Saga. working relationship, what is that between the two of you? Who pitches the ideas to who, and what's that process like?
Well, it would depend. In that case, we were both writers on the Spider-Man titles, but I had also worked as Howard's editor for quite a while. He was writing for me in Marvel Comics Presents. I think that's probably the only writing work you did for me, Howard, on Marvel Comics Presents.
Yeah, I mean, because everything else you had regular writers on the series.
We had that working relationship as well. Howard, however, never reciprocated and hired me to write anything that he edited.
I've never read anything he's written, so
I'm just saying. But so we had.
Is that true? Are you sure? I'm going to Google that. Do you? I think you did work. No, I don't know.
You know what, Howard? By the time you left staff, I don't even know if I was writing yet.
I think you're right. I mean, but that helped us, and continues to, because Terry and I have continued to work together in various permutations throughout the past 30 some odd years. And I think we had a well-established relationship, you being the editor and me the writer, and it was very comfortable. And Terry, I mean, I'm going to get serious, which is rare. Terry is one of the few editors I've worked with that I've trusted completely. And that continues. Because even when he wasn't my editor, there were times when 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we would be on the phone together, and I would be bouncing ideas off of him, of things that I was doing for somebody else. Because a lot of it came from friendship, but he had the editorial point of view that I thoroughly trusted. And and that then carried into us being able to be collaborators together, because I mean we did it, we consulted on a TV show a few years ago, and they had called me in to do some rewrites on something, and it was exactly the way I always envisioned comic books were made, which is not the way they're made, but they needed a whole bunch of rewrites done very quickly. And they gave us an office. So we had this big meeting, and then they said, okay, go ahead, go do it. And they gave us an office. Fortunately, I had my laptop with me. We went into the office. I sat on one side of the desk, and Terry was on the other. And we just started talking. I would write for a little bit, and I'd turn the computer around to Terry, and he would read it. And he said, yeah, but what if you did this instead of that? Oh, good. And I turned it around again. So there was no ego involved, because because of trust, I knew if he threw out an idea, I wasn't going to try to say, oh, no, that was not my idea. There was an implicit trust, and we just sat there for, it was like, I don't know, 3-4 hours, just going back and forth like that, until Terry eventually said, Howard, we're going too fast. We want to make sure they see value in our.
I was afraid they wouldn't think we were worth the money if we could get it done that quickly.
Right.
And we had to sort of pretend it took more effort, because it did.
Yes.
I mean, you work when you write comic books, but it's not a lot of effort if you enjoy what you're doing.
Right? Exactly. But also, it's not a lot of effort if you trust the other person on the other side of the desk, literally in this case.
I think part of what Howard's referring to, correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, is there were two very distinct styles of editing. There were editors who really had a vision for what they wanted to do with the book. And then I would imagine as a writer, that would be more difficult to work under, because you're never going to be able to get into their head and do exactly what they've imagined. They can give you some direction. I was not that kind of editor. I preferred to hire creators I respected and then shepherd their work, rather than telling them, this is what I want to see happen in Namor for the next 6 months or whatever. I would hire John Byrne because I respected his work, and then I would help him bring his vision to life. It might have had a little to do with laziness on my part, maybe, but I think Howard preferred working in that style, where he wasn't being told what to write.
Oh, absolutely. That's the way I edited as well. I always felt like the most important part of my job, and the most difficult was assembling the right team, and then letting them go, giving them guidance when they needed it or they asked for it. And if you establish that relationship well in the beginning, writers are going to come to you and say, well, what do you think about this? Versus it being just nonstop headbutting. And I've worked in that situation as well, and it's just not fun. And so with Terry and I think, and that, as I said, that carried over to when we were both writing. Boy, I'm noticing how much I do talk with my hands. When we were both working on Spider-Man titles, we had that well-established relationship already. So as I said, we would just call each other any time of day or night to bounce ideas off of each other, which is how the Clone Saga, which is all Terry Kavanagh's fault, came to be.
I knew this was coming.
Well,
Yes,
how far in advance did you guys plan the Clone Saga? Like, did you have the whole thing from start to finish planned out, or did you have an idea for it and then it just kind of let it go?
Yes, we had the entire thing from start to finish basically planned out. That all went out the window when the sales and marketing departments got involved, because we sales so specific. So
it was a 3-month story arc that we planned out.
4 times.
I have, if I took the time, I have the notebook, because I always have a notebook, and I have the notebook that breaks down what happens in each issue over 3 months, a year's worth of stories. Well, a solid year over 4 titles gives you 3 months. So that's how we planned it, and it was my take on it, and Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a victim of its own success at the time, because sales on everything else were going down, and Spider-Man, when we started the Clone Saga, was going up. And that's when sales and marketing, who at that time in Marvel's history ruled everything, said, oh, okay, no, you guys have to keep this story going on, at which point somebody raised their hand, me, said, excuse me, do you know what story is? The story, a la Jim Shooter and anybody who's ever written a story, has a beginning, middle, and an end. And we knew what the end was going to be. And we can do the next story if you want, but this story should come to an end. And they said, no, you have to keep it going.
And we, of course, as you probably know, had a completely different ending in mind. The point of us doing this story is we, as writers, as we aged and got married and got mortgages, had sort of written Spider-Man away from the core audience, where when we were young, we were reading, he had to figure out how to do his homework, go on a date, take care of Aunt May, have a cold, and fight Dr. Octopus at the same time. Suddenly he's like, oh, where do I come up with the mortgage payment? My wife's the most beautiful person in town. So all the sexual tension was out of the storyline at that point, because he was married. So that was
and he didn't have to worry about the mortgage payment because she was a supermodel.
Money. Yes, exactly. So we realized we had written ourselves into that corner, and the mandate, Howard and I have a little different memory about this in some way. I don't remember. There's talk that the mandate was we had to address the success of the death of Superman, and you sort of remember that was the case. I don't really remember that.
Oh no, I know that is not. I'm sorry, Tara, but I do know we kind of came in right around the same time. What we were charged with was coming up with the next big storyline.
The big event.
That's all.
The big
event. It was an event, as we, when everybody was doing events back then, and they said, okay, it's Spider-Man's turn. So I think we're on the same page with that.
Okay. Well, Howard had been writing Spider-Man longer than I had. I actually think I took over Web when you moved to adjectiveless.
You can keep going, but there's a slight change in that you did take over Web for me, because, well, I'm going to go and tell the story now anyway. I realized, because I was writing for you at that point, I realized I was doing Ghost Rider. I did not take the lead story in Marvel Comics Presents with Ghost Rider, but you had me do that Havoc.
Havoc, yep.
Yes, storyline. And I remember sitting down, so I was doing Web of Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, and the Havoc story. And one time, my copies came in, and I looked, and I thought, oh, Havoc and Danny Ketch and Peter Parker all sound exactly the same, because I was taking on too much work, and I had just started my family at that point, so it just seemed like I said, something's got to give. And I went to Danny Fingeroth, who was the editor, and said, you know what, I have to leave web. It's not working. It was a dream come true to write Spider-Man, but I think I'm done with that. And he said, okay. And he hired Terry, which was great. And then I think it was only with like a month or two later, Danny called me up and said, okay, Howard, Todd is no longer doing adjectiveless Spider-Man, and we need a new writer. Do you want to do that? And I said, Danny, did you think my problem was with the adjective? But at that point, I had already finished the Havoc series, and I just had the one Ghost Rider book, and I thought, yeah, okay, I'll do it. So that's
limited, yeah.
Yeah.
So what had happened is we were constantly talking about what to do with Spider-Man. We wanted each book to have its own identity and to be written that way, but there needed to be some overarching background going on, at least to it. We hadn't yet been sort of tasked to do an event, although that's what the Spider-Man story conferences were about. And Howard and I had been talking, and I remembered the Jerry Conway two-parter from when we were young, when the Clone was introduced. And I particularly remembered, I couldn't have articulated this when I was younger, but later I realized what was so fascinating to me about that story is, Clone of Spider-Man's a good guy. So it was two good guys in a bad situation, which is very different. So it made for richer rooting value somehow, and or it was harder to decide what you thought would be a good ending for it. So everything was a little more interesting that way, to me, at least. So when we would be talking at 2 a.m. and having these conversations about Spider-Man, I at some point brought up that story. And I remember that the story ended with, the Clone being thrown down a smokestack at the downtown, the Lower East Side Con Edison, because he appeared to be dead. And then the real Spider-Man swinging across town with a letter from Kurt Connors, who had done some scientific experimentation to determine who was the clone and who was the real one, because they both believed they were the real one. And then in my mind, at least, what I remembered was Spider-Man thinking, you know what, I'm on my way to meet Mary Jane. I love her so much. Only a real human could have this kind of love, because, that's a thing. We don't know how clones are going to feel. And he tore up the results and threw it away. I would not have done, but that's why no one makes comic books about me.
And nobody's cloned you that we know
of. So I remember thinking, well, we're in this position where we've written Spider-Man away from us because he's finished school, he's married, he has this job. What if the other one's alive somewhere, left town because he's a good guy, he didn't want to interfere with Peter Parker's life, left town, he's been living somewhere else, Aunt May gets sick, he has to come back and visit her, and we'll do this storyline where it appears that Peter, the one who's with Mary Jane, is the real one, and he has to deal with this clone coming back, and then turn it on its head by the end, where the clone turns out to be the real one, Peter's the fake one. We can write Peter off into the sunset with a happy ending by having them discover, Peter and Mary Jane, that, she's pregnant, and he realizes with great power comes great responsibility. My responsibility now is to my wife and child. And so he gets a happy ending and leaves. We don't have to kill him. We don't have to do anything like that, because that we knew would have pissed off people who've been reading that Peter Parker for 20 years. But we now have a Spider-Man who was single. He was back in school. He was doing all that. And we'd have done it organically, because there were discussions amongst editorial and ourselves. Should Peter get divorced? And we realized, no, that's more baggage we're adding to him. That's just making it worse, actually. Now he's even older because he's been married and divorced. So that was the sort of goal. And Howard and I bounced it off each other back and forth. Then when they asked us directly for ideas, I was relatively new to the Spider-Man title. So I just sort of sat there quietly, and Howard's like, Terry has an idea. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I do. And I've sort of mumbled under my breath. They're like, what's the idea? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Nobody's really going to like it. It's a dumb idea. And Howard's like, it's clones. Tell him about the clone. And actually, part of my inspiration was Dolly the Clone had been on the cover of Time magazine around that point, one of the first fully matured clones. And I remember thinking comic books are supposed to have science ahead of the curve. And now there's actually clones, biological clones actually happening. So we should include that. There was not, when we first pitched it, when Howard first forced me to speak about it, it was not universally well received by the writers and artists in the room. I remember Mark DeMatteis saying, we just did the parents of Peter Parker coming back and they turned out to be LMDs and it's a fake all over again. And I had not gotten to the part where the one who comes back turns out to be the real one. That got him on board. He's like, then this isn't a story we're going to do and then undo at the end and make go away. And then he got on board with it. I think the biggest resistance was probably Danny Fingeroff at that point.
Who was the editor.
The editor. And that's a problem. We couldn't do anything without the editor.
But then all of us, all the writers were on board. And that made him to have to at least listen to us, because I in particular, I'm very loud, so you don't really have a choice. And even when Terry pitched the story to me, I wasn't as rooted in all the older Spider-Man lore as Terry was. So I had to go back and review it, and I thought about it, but the thing that immediately sparked in my mind when he told me, and he drops the body down a smokestack in order to incinerate it, I said to him, wait a minute, that's not how smokestacks work. There's not like fire directly at the bottom there. I said, there's going to be like tubes, and they, especially with the EPA and all that. I said, so there's just at best, there's a rotting corpse at the bottom of that smokestack. So at least on a granular and logical level, it made sense to at least explore this. And I did feel that it was the best non-cop-out that we could do to get us, because again, as Terry said, the divorce thing never was going to work for us, because it was just adding more baggage. It was aging Peter Parker. But anyway, so we pitched it. Danny wasn't sure, but he was agreeing to it at the end of that meeting. And do you want to?
Sorry to interrupt. No, he agreed to bring in Tom DeFalco, the editor-in-chief at that point. And then we made Danny promise, okay, but please don't tell Tom, because we knew Danny was not on board. So he was probably going to approach it by saying, Tom, they have this idea. You don't like it, do you? It's not a good idea, is it?
Yes.
We knew Danny was going to do that. So we made him promise that he just asked Tom to come to the meeting the next day and not tell him what it was about. And then we, who were excited about it, could pitch it.
Including Marc DeMatteis. That was I'm sorry, he now pronounces his name DeMatteis.
Is that true?
Yeah. Next time I see him, I'm just going to tell he's wrong.
Okay, me too.
Yeah.
So we knew if we pitched it with enthusiasm, there was a better chance of Tom DeFalco approving. And we knew this would be a big deal if at the end what we had done is taken the Spider-Man people had been reading about for 20 years and said, no, that's not Spider-Man. We have a different one now. And Danny didn't exactly live up to that promise. And Tom came there to that meeting with all the reasons we shouldn't do it. And I remember one specifically, which was, that's just like the Dallas year where Bobby's in the shower and it turned out he didn't die and it was a big dream. And I remember having to say, it's not like that at all. All this stuff really happened. That Dallas year didn't happen. It was fake. This all happened. It just happened to someone different than we thought it was happening to. So all of that continuity was still real and on board. We didn't have to negate or deny any of that. And I think Tom has said in interviews since then, he did not like the idea when he showed up there, but the enthusiasm we all had for it is what sold him. He kept saying, if the writers who are a little jaded, they, have been writing Spider-Man for a while, if they're this excited about it, we got to give the readers a chance to experience this.
Yeah.
And once it gets the green light, do you feel the pressure? Like, okay, now, they're putting a lot into this book. Are you guys feeling pressure at all coming up with stuff?
I can't speak for Howard, but I felt pressure every issue of Spider-Man I ever wrote. I knew, oh, this is the flagship character. This is a character that was important to me when I was younger. Every word I ever wrote coming out of Peter or Spider-Man's mouth, I was much more comfortable with writing original characters because I just felt like I'm not shepherding a character that means so much to other people.
Yeah.
I didn't feel any more pressure doing the Clone Saga.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I don't feel like there was additional pressure than, again, getting to write every month the stories of a character that I grew up reading, and but I didn't feel like the pressure came later when marketing got involved, because we had a story that we knew was solid. We had 4, and at the end of Tom's excitement about the clone story, and it was not a saga at that point, it was a clone story that we were doing because it was going to be 3 months. We realized we still needed a 4th writer, and it was Tom.
That's right.
So he not only got bitten by the enthusiasm bug, but enough so that he took on one of the titles. The pressure came later on when they were asking us to continue a story that was not the story that we had come up with, and then Terry was gone, and even later when we were trying to resolve all of the, I believe the term is mishigash, that was thrown in there that had nothing to do with the core story that we had conceived in that meeting. That's where it went off the rails.
Yeah, it was just padding out the middle and just throwing stuff at the wall so that we didn't have to end it. And honestly, I think if it had ended sooner, it would have ended the way we wanted. But what happened in the meantime was Bob Harris ended up as editor-in-chief. And I've never actually asked Bob this. For whatever reason, he did not want it to end with Ben Reilly being the
No, I think you're misremembering, because there was that time in between.
The executive editors.
Yeah, there were the multiple editor-in-chief. And that's what, and Bob Budiansky came in. Were you on board with that?
I was off the books by then.
Yeah. So at first it was, and Bob Budiansky didn't, because, and I don't know what pressure they were getting from marketing or whatever, but they all had, first it was, you have to continue the story. And then we got into a situation with Budiansky as editor-in-chief of how to resolve all these disparate pieces that were thrown in there because we were trying to pad the story. And I remember being in horrific meetings where we had, every writer, every editor. Did we lose our? No.
I'm sorry about that.
We had meetings where we had every writer, every editor, and the group editor or editor-in-chief, and all of the assistant editors and associate editors, where we would be on, this was before the days of Zoom, where we would be on conference calls, which is impossible. And so we were trying to write this thing by committee, and where we were trying to, well, and somebody, and many of the, you're dealing with a group of real hardcore fans in there. And so everybody could always come up with a reason that why one thing that was thrown out wouldn't work. Well, because in issue 62 on page 12, panel 4, Spider-Man said this, and that never really won me over, because as I always say, I like to be aware of continuity, but I don't want to be a slave to continuity, because otherwise you can never write a new story. And so actually, my only quibble with you, Terry, is Bob actually was the one that started saying, you got to just resolve this. But he came in like when we were already over 2 years into that story.
Which Bob, Budiansky or Harris?
Harris.
Okay.
Bob Harris. It was Budiansky that we had it just going on and on and on. And I wrote some stories. I do a lot of convention appearances, and there's one, and I will not tell you which one it is, because I don't remember. I don't pay attention to issue numbers, but there's one comic that people bring to me and I go, oh man, I don't want to sign this. This is the example of the worst thing I would have ever wanted to do. I'll tell you, it was one where I think it was Spider-Man or it might have been Ben Reilly on the cover and it was a virtual reality issue. So everything was supposed to take place in virtual reality, and he's jumping towards the camera with 2 Uzis in his hand, which is like right on target for Spider-Man.
Ooh. Wow.
Yeah, and I get to sign that book.
Wow.
So anyway,
cover the Uzis with your signature.
There you go.
Yeah, I try. I really do try. But anyway, see, you thought you were going to be in charge of this interview, didn't you? But we took it straight to the Clone Saga. The question was, so how did this friendship start?
Yeah. My usual response to the Clone Saga, because for years my Wikipedia entry, which was relatively short, said largely responsible for the notorious Clone Saga. I'm like, oh great.
I keep adding it.
Oh, thanks for that. I was vilified in the industry at the time because it dragged out so long. Now Ben Reilly has made a comeback and it's not quite so bad. But my response for decades was, I pitched the Clone Saga about Aunt May and Howard misinterpreted it and called it clones in the meeting. I don't know if I've ever told you that that's my position on this, Howard.
Oh, no, you have. And I always lead with it was all Terry Kavanagh's fault, unless you liked it. All of those stories were mine.
Yeah. The ones you liked were me. Everything
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I want to jump back for you because you brought up, Terry, original stories. And one thing that were all original stories was the new universe.
Yes.
And I've taken at first I didn't know what to think of the new universe, but I was out of comics for about 20 years. I jumped back in about 10 years ago, and I found myself saying, I've missed so much that there's no way I could read a new comic now and know what's going on. So if there were comics that started fresh with no backstory that you could just jump in the first place, that would be cool. And I look at the new universe now through that sort of lens. How was it pitched to you guys?
Howard, you can answer that better than me because I think by the time I became an assistant, the new universe was already out there.
Was it really?
Amazing.
See, I wasn't involved in the conception of it. I was an assistant editor on the Avengers line of books, and I think I may have become an editor somewhere early on in it, but it was supposed to be, my take on it was going to be the Marvel universe done right and new. And
actually, wasn't it the world outside your window?
The world outside your window, yes. And so I like I said, I wasn't there I was not involved in any meetings there. I came in as the editor. Well, I can't remember. It was probably a year into it. But so prior to that, I would have been either an assistant editor or a managing editor and not had anything involved in it. But you wrote some, right, Terry?
Well, my first writing gig was Kickers Inc. But I can tell you that there was a lot of fear attached to the new universe. I think that's a fair way to put it, Howard. That
yeah, I think so.
And it might have to do with what I described as the difference between two different editing styles. This was Jim Shooter's baby. It was totally Jim Shooter's baby. He was pitching this. So he had a vision for how he wanted every single title to go. And again, nobody else can live up to someone else's vision because they're not in their head and they don't know the little details. He could communicate broad strokes, but then somebody might use a word that in his mind that character would never use somehow that you couldn't know ahead of time. So that would fall on the editor and or the writer. So there was a lot of fear. I mean, that's honestly how I got to start writing Kickers Inc. Because at that point, people didn't want involvement. the creators didn't want involvement in the new universe, it meant there would be a target. Is that fair?
Oh yes, because when when I was brought in to be the editor of the book was, I think the previous two editors of the line had been fired, and they said, "Okay, Howard, you're next up."
Yeah.
And I remember going to Tom DeFalco that day and saying, because I was then in this kind of nebulous in between position. I was a managing editor, which meant I was handling just side projects, licensed projects. There were like ads that used Marvel characters in magazines, that kind of thing. But the next step was full editor, and this was going to be my debut. And I went into DeFalco, who was my immediate supervisor as the managing editor, and saying, "Tom, can you get me passed over?" I mean, it was going to be more money and more responsibility, but I also, to use a Tom expression, it was going to be, one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel. And so I said, "Tom, can you maybe get me passed over and give it to the next person?" And he said, I is required to do a Tom DeFalco in person. The thing of it is, Mr. Howard, you're screwed no matter what. He said, "If you take it, you're probably going to get fired. And if you don't take it, you'll never get promoted again."
Yeah.
And so I got the promotion and immediately started working on my resume. And because I assumed I was not going to be at Marvel for much longer. And that had nothing to do with anything other than the previous history. Right. The last two people in a very short period of time, at a period at Marvel where no one ever got fired. Nobody in editorial ever got fired. Those two editors on the new universe had been fired. And I mean, I had a relatively good working relationship with Jim at that time, because I was an assistant editor and I was working for Mark Grunwald, and we didn't tend to be a focus. Our office wasn't a focus of any of the issues that were going on. So I didn't actually have an issue with Jim necessarily. It was just, this is what's happened to everybody else. So at the time, and this does involve Terry, just as I was told I was getting this promotion, my wife and I had a vacation scheduled. We were renting a condo in Florida on the beach, and it was all paid for. The tickets, the flight was paid for. The condo was paid for. We were sharing it with her mom, and but I was getting this pretty high profile promotion, and I thought, if this was any other time, I would just cancel my vacation, say to my wife, "Sorry, I'm not going to be able to join you," whatever. But I thought, what? I may not have an opportunity for a vacation in a while because I'm going to need a new job. So I took the vacation and I just sat there in Florida, occasionally working on my resume, and on the beach. And then one day I was sitting on the beach, and my mother-in-law, who was, again, the condo was right on the beach, with a balcony looking out over Gulf of Mexico. I probably have seen Terry's current house from where we were. And my mother-in-law is out on the balcony, like 5 floors up or so. And, "Howard, there's a phone call from the office for you." And I went, "Oh God, already? I haven't even really started. And it's already." And I go upstairs and it's Terry on the phone. He said, "Howard, has anybody told you what happened?" At Marvel. I said, "No, what?" He said, "Jim Shooter got fired 2 days ago." And I was impressed. I think my first question, "Terry, how did you find the phone number for where I was?"
I was literally about to ask that. How the hell did I know where you were?
Because this was before anybody had cell phones, remember? I probably had left the number with my assistant, Rockwitz, at the time. But so, and again, I did not have, I didn't even work on those issues long enough with Jim to have had a negative interaction about the new universe, but it certainly was more relaxing of a vacation from that point on, because I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm not, because, DeFalco was the EIC, but Grunwald, who was my he was my mentor, he was now the executive editor. And I thought, okay, I know how to work with those guys. I think I can do this.
And
so anyway.
Those guys didn't have the passion for the new universe that, I'm not saying a passion for a project is a bad thing, but in the case with Jim Shooter, it was an obstacle for all the creators and editorial to sort of overcome. It didn't really translate in a positive way when he was doing it. And speaking of what Howard said a little earlier, I was an assistant on the X-Men books at that point under Ann Nesenti, and I had a fine relationship with Jim because, all credit to Jim, if he had a problem with something that came out of our office, he never would take it out on me or even say a negative word to me, because he knew I was powerless, first off, and I had nothing to do with it. And he would come in and take up his issue with Ann. And so there was no bad blood between Jim and I at all, the same as you spoke to.
Yeah, no, Jim wrote a very, he gave me very positive reviews on the first story I wrote, which was Iron Man number 211. I'm looking at the splash page hanging right over my desk right now.
The Living Laser.
Return of the Living Laser.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah.
And he wrote, when Deb and I were buying our first apartment, he did a very nice recommendation to the bank so we could get a mortgage. Actually, he did two. One was a joke, which was hysterical, where where he said, no, I wouldn't give this guy anything. And the other one was serious. And I think we sent the right one in. But it was an odd time. But again, we were both assistants, and Jim did tend to treat the assistants really well. So I just never had any grievance with him. But then I was the editor. I was put in charge of the new universe, and what I was told was, you need to get sales up, and you need to get sales up now.
Yeah.
So, and then we did for a short time.
Most definitely.
Because I was writing Kickers Inc.
Yeah, no, I think I got rid of that book as soon as possible.
I don't blame you.
Anyway.
One thing, Terry, you mentioned that, and you both worked in the X universe for a while. It seems the X universe is somewhat separate from a lot of what goes on in Marvel. When you're working in that universe, is it a different sort of feel than maybe on other books?
It's a good question. So my first, I started actually as Ralph Macchio's temporary assistant when his assistant got mono or something for like 6 months. And then they kept me around until another assistant editor job opened up, and it was Ann Nesenti. So my only real exposure as a committed full-time employee there was on the X books. And certainly they were treated with more respect. That office was probably treated with more respect than other offices, I guess, because of the sales. I think that's a fair thing to say at that point. Maybe they were all laughing at us behind our back in other offices. I'm not sure. And if that's the case, don't tell me, Howard.
I won't.
Oh, thanks for that.
Yeah.
So I have no real way to compare it. And I didn't start writing any X books until years and years later, when Alan Davis was plotting and he requested me as the scripter on it. But I will say, when I became the editor of Excalibur, it was a little problematic, and even more so because you had to get stuff approved by the X office for if you were using any of their characters, and every book wanted to use Wolverine specifically. And when I was doing Marvel Comics Presents, the mandate when we started was Wolverine had to be the lead feature in every issue. So I had to get every 8-page story every 2 weeks, every 8-page chapter approved by, it was probably Bob by then, Bob Harris, I think, approved by him. And he rightfully didn't really want anything of value to happen to his characters outside of his books. I understand that. I would have felt the same way there. And it came to a bit of a head around, and this didn't involve Bob at all, but once I had hired Barry Windsor Smith to do Weapon X and brought him on, and the pages started coming in, once again, sales and marketing got involved. And I got called to Tom DeFalco's office, and Carol Kalish was there, and someone else. The sales and marketing department was there. And they had just said to Tom, well, this book, it's too good. It has to be a hardcover graphic novel with enhanced coloring, etc. And I didn't want that, obviously. And that's not the deal I had cut with Barry. We knew it would probably be a trade paperback eventually, and he could recolor it with better, because it would be printed on better paper. But I didn't want that. I sort of put up my argument against it. Tom said, nope, this is the way it's going to be, etc. And I left. I went back to my office. I'm sort of working up how I'm going to call Barry and talk to him about this, because for all I knew, he was going to quit. I didn't know. And we had solicited all these titles. And then if you don't publish the stories you had solicited, then it becomes returnable in the direct market, which is a problem for the bottom line. So I thought about it like 10 minutes. I went back to Tom and I said, Tom, I just got to get this straight. The mandate is I have to do Wolverine in the lead feature every issue, twice a month. But if it's a good story, good Wolverine story, it can't go in Marvel Comics Presents. So the mandate is I have to publish crappy Wolverine stories every 2 weeks. And he looked at me for a minute, and I backed away a bit because I wasn't sure if I was going out the window or not. I really wasn't sure how he was going to react to that at all. And he looked at me and said, you're absolutely right. Stay here. And he called the marketing and sales people back and said, it's going to be published in Marvel Comics Presents first, and then be into a trade paperback, and he can recolor it, etc. We'll do it as a hardcover. Then the issue came up with Bob at that point, because now we were effectively doing the origin of Wolverine, which again, rightfully, he did not want happening outside of his titles. That was a big deal. The origin of Wolverine had not even been touched upon, really. Little hints, I guess, have been dropped along the way. And it led to certain changes. The character in there could only be called the Professor, and although the implication was it was Xavier, and it never was meant to be, but that's how a lot of fans interpreted it. So this is a long-winded way to answer your question. There was a mystique around the X-Men offices and books that I would say was different from the other titles, Howard?
Yeah, I guess. I don't think I was ever as aware of it. I wasn't as interested in the X office because I was working on the books with characters that I grew up with. I started out working on the Avengers line of books, and then I ultimately wound up editing those as well. So we were aware. There was always the element, especially as time went on, especially when Bob took over in particular, when the sales started going through the roof, you realized that our competition, everybody talked about the competition between DC and Marvel. When I was on staff at Marvel, we never considered DC competition.
Yep.
Because in terms of sales, it wasn't even close at that time. And so I always felt like our competition was down the hall.
It was
in any direction. The X-Men was the most, but we were competing among, I felt, and this may be, erroneous, this is somebody, puffing themselves up, but I felt like Marvel had the top talent at that point, both editorially and creatively. And so we were all vying to get and sign people to do books for our office. Bob, once they took off though, Bob Harris could come and say, hey,
yeah,
want to write an X book? And Bob is a good friend of ours, so we'll talk as much smack about him as we want. And I will call him this afternoon and tell him that I did. But he did do that. And I found out recently, I tried to get Fabian Nicieza at a convention a few years ago to introduce me to, his name went right out of my head, Batman artist.
Good story, Howard.
Yeah, oh man. Oh, I had his name right there. Who's the most popular Batman artist with Scott Snyder?
Greg Capullo.
Greg Capullo, okay? So I had been reading his Batman stories and loved his work, and I was at the show and I saw Fabian. I said, Fabe, do you know Greg? He said, uh-huh. he said, I said, do you mind introducing me to him? Because I just want to tell him how much I love his stuff. He said, Howard, you gave him his big break. And I said, oh, did I? I hired him to do Quasar for me. He did it for a while, and then Bob Harris saw how good he was, and he stole him away from us.
Yeah.
And so anytime I see Greg, he comes up to me and gives me a big bear hug because I gave him, I mean, he had done stuff before that, but I gave him his break at Marvel. But that was our competition. And so my favorite interaction with Bob was after I wrote Hearts of Darkness, which was, a project that was created just to print cash, Ghost Rider, Punisher, and Wolverine in one title. And the sales figures came out, and I came up to the office the day the sales figures came out. And I walk in to the bullpen, and Bob is across the way. And now Bob is a good friend. I mean, he was best man at my wedding. He's my daughter's godfather. Okay, he sees me, and all of a sudden he comes.
Howard, your audio is blipped out.
Yeah, we can't hear
Your
you.
audio is gone. Can't hear you. Can you hear him, Oren?
No, I can't hear him at all.
Try again, Howard.
Anybody? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Where did it end?
He comes up to you. You would come up to the office. You were off staff. You would come up, and he walks. He's Howard. Walk with me.
Yes, yeah, that's a Bobism. Howard, walk with me, babe. And and I said, oh, this is weird. This is not my buddy. He said, Howard, have you ever thought about doing something for the X office? I said, no. And he was shocked that I was. I said, well, why not? I said, well, because I'm busy, and Ghost Rider's doing pretty well. And he said, well, do you have a favorite X-Men character? I said, no, I just wrote Wolverine. I guess I like him. He said, anybody else? I said, not really. And that's when I said, well, I guess I kind of like Gambit. He said, okay, let's have lunch today. And that's how the Gambit series. Yeah. So I didn't buy into the mystique of the X-Men stuff. Mm-hmm. But Terry is right. It existed. Gotcha. But it mostly as competition, as far as I was concerned.
Yes, I would say so. And as people you wanted to hide your talent from. The talent you had hired. Like Scott Lobdell did his first work for Marvel Comics Presents. It was a title. It was great fun it almost killed me, but it was a great fun title to edit because I could bring in talent that hadn't worked for Marvel in a long time, but that I highly respected, and have them, reintroduce characters like the Black Panther, have Don McGregor do that hadn't been around forever. And then I could also try out new writers on one-shot, eight-page stories. And I knew I could bring in a new writer, and then bring in a really well-established artist. And so if the writer had some weaknesses, that artist would know better how to tell a story, and it would make it a more balanced product, and it'd be a more recognizable name. And Scott Lobdell, all credit to Scott Lobdell, must have pitched 60 stories to me before I finally bought one. And then within like a year, Bob grabbed him. And and Scott was my go-to guy for, I need someone to do a Sunfire story, 8-page Sunfire story or something, because Don Heck was looking for work, and I wanted to give him an 8-page story, and we had somehow agreed on Sunfire. I don't remember how. And Scott would be my go-to guy. I knew he had really developed into a solid talent. And then I realized at that point, I'm like, really, all I am is developing talent for the X office. That's what I'm doing. I am really the training place for the X office. A little annoying, but nothing you could do about it.
Right.
Like you said, it was a heck of a lot of talent that came through you and, went to them. So that's a credit to you as well.
Thank you.
A little bit about Ghost Rider, because you took this book and, pun intended, set it on fire. Like, it was ridiculously good. What did you see in the original run that you thought worked and didn't work?
I think I can answer it by the way I got the job, or got the series. I was a Ghost Rider fan. I mean, number one, is a flaming skull demon on a motorcycle. You know, it grabbed me. I thought the lead character had one of the cooler names in comic books, Johnny Blaze, and I just was a fan. I liked the way the series ended in particular, and it was Marc DeMatteis who was writing it at the time, and I genuinely enjoyed it. It was, I think what happened was it wrapped up right as I was getting into the business. I can't remember, but I got into Marvel as an assistant editor because I grew up with Mike Carlin, who went on to do other things, apparently, I don't know. And Mike was Mark's assistant. He got a promotion. I was really looking to change careers. So he said, why don't you interview for this job? So I did, and I got it. And Mark and I, back in the day, the assistant and the editor worked in a very small office, side by side, very close. So Mark and I would talk all the time, and I would talk about how much I like Ghost Rider, which was considered a failed character at Marvel. You know, just it was canceled the first time because of sales. And so but I was always talking about it. And then when I was an editor, I think I might have been doing the New Universe at that point, Mark came in and said, we want to bring, he was the executive editor and DeFalco was the AIC. He said, we want to bring Ghost Rider back. And I know you're a fan, so why don't you give us a pitch? I said, yeah, okay, sure. And he said, and then he started to walk out of there. Oh, wait, there's one caveat. You can't use Johnny Blaze. And I went, wait, why? And he said, nope, we want a brand new character, so you have to come up with the new character.
Why did they want to not use Johnny Blaze?
I guess they too were feeling like it was too much, would be too much of an association with a series that really had low sales. Okay. And so they wanted to shake it up. And that is, so I was really kind of just rooted in the character. I liked the stuff that DeMatteis did with Centaurius and, things like that. And I started to, I was reading a ton of books on writing and, the old axiom of, write what you know. And I thought, well, okay, what do I know? And I know Brooklyn because I was born and raised there, and I know cemeteries because I literally grew up directly across the street from the cemetery. And I thought, okay, let's see what I got there. And that's how I started. But what I knew I didn't want to do was I didn't want it to be a strictly supernatural book. I felt like Ghost Rider existed best on that fringe of the Marvel universe, the edge, which they co-opted at some point as a title for the group, that edge between, the light and dark of the Marvel universe. And I wanted, my intent in the beginning was for Ghost Rider to be the only strictly supernatural character in the title. So if you look at the first year, I introduced a lot of new villains, and very few of them were supernatural. They sometimes gave, like Blackout was a wannabe vampire. He was not a vampire. He was a mutant because he had a mutant power. And those were the directions I was going with Ghost Rider. And then it became a victim of its own success when everybody wanted, once they couldn't all feature Wolverine in a book, they all wanted to feature Ghost Rider in a book.
That was my exact next question to you was, is it frustrating when, as a writer, when your character's being pulled into different books with different storylines and stuff like that?
Yes, but, and I think you'd agree with this, Tara, we know what we were signing up for. That was the Marvel Universe. It was not creator owned. It was, these are Marvel characters. So you don't have a lot of choice. Probably equally or more frustrating for the editor. I mean, Terry was mentioning Bob Harris. Well, in this case, it was Bobby Chase who had to read then all these plots for Ghost Rider's appearance in other books, and there were times where it was everywhere, and because everybody wanted to. And I remember at one point, and I will not mention names, but there was one creator who wanted to use Ghost Rider, and I walked in. If I tell you the editor's office, Terry at least will know who it was. But I walked into the editor's office for an unrelated issue and reason, and the editor said, "Howard, I have X on the phone." And that is not Chris Claremont. That was not. He has a couple of questions about Ghost Rider. I get on the phone. I said, "Okay, sure. Yeah, hi. What's going on?" And he said, "Yeah, Ghost Rider. Tell me about him." And I was stunned, speechless for a second, which never happens. And I think my response, and I'll clean it up, was, "Read the friggin' book." And I handed the phone back to the editor and I left. Because don't ask me to do your job. You're literally wanting to use Ghost Rider in this book so you get a flaming skull on the cover and your sales are going to go up. So
literally, Ghost Rider was so successful that the mandate for Marvel Comics Presents changed to now you have to have a lead Wolverine feature and a lead Ghost Rider feature. That's when it turned into a flip book. Yep. And I felt bad for Bobby the same way I sort of felt bad for Bob about that.
Yeah, but we don't ever like to feel too badly for Bob.
No, exactly. It felt worse for Bobby.
Yeah.
And now I had to run every 8-page chapter every 2 weeks through Bobby, and she was getting barraged from every office there. Not to mention she's just trying to do her own work and get her own books out, her own 5 titles or whatever they were. Now she's sort of half working on 12 other titles at any given point.
Well, and that's why, proving Terry's not as stupid as he looks or sounds. Hey. I didn't mean to only refer to your looks. Also, you're not as stupid as you sound. He wisely chose the lead writer of Ghost Rider to do most of the lead features of Marvel Comics Presents, because then Bobby knew at least there was going to be a person who knew what she was going to, so she didn't have
the character, and who cared as much about the character.
Exactly. So, and that was smart. So
I have my moments.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And Mark, I was expressing that same. Shara's art on it, I thought worked so well, with what was going on in the book as well, too.
Mm-hmm.
It was perfect. Tex era was.
Oh yeah, Tex was great. It was fun. I mean, I was very fortunate throughout my career at Marvel with the artists that I worked with, and I mean, we started out with Javier as the lead penciler with Mark's inks, and so that made a really nice transition when Javier was not on the book, and that always happens for a variety of reasons, usually involving scheduling and how quickly people can work. But it made for a natural transition for when Mark took it over, and it really informed the stories that I was going to write, because Tex's art is a little bit more gritty than Javier's, and so I wrote a few of my favorite stories that I wrote with the character Scarecrow. I don't think I could have done as, I mean, they're some of my favorite stories, and I think because of Mark's art. It's great. It was great working with him and everybody else that I worked with. There were very few artists that I worked with on Ghost Rider, and I did it for a long time. That I would say, oh boy, I wish I didn't work with that person. One or two.
That happens. And Terry, quickly, because I know we're coming up on some time here. Carnage, did you experience that too? Because he blew up as well, with popularity.
Yes.
How was that experience, working on the Carnage books?
Carnage, I didn't create Carnage, and Carnage was around for a while, but I was on the books when we did the Maximum Carnage storyline. And again, that was a sort of mandate from the Spider-Man office that I actually don't remember how that developed, Maximum Carnage. That was before the Clone Saga, I think.
Yeah, 'cause I didn't have anything to do with it.
Okay, so that was between your Spider-Man tenures. I almost suspect that entire storyline came out of someone coming up with the name Maximum Carnage and just saying, we'll do something that's Carnage focused. And then I do remember discussing in the editorial meetings about it that let's give him a family. And I thought, that's odd. That's a sort of, the guy's just a total psychopath who's murdering everybody he sees, but now he's going to have a girlfriend and sort of kids that he's fostering that were all Demo Goblin or whoever else they were. I barely remember the characters in there, but that was an example of just a mandate. I don't know that I would ever have chosen to use Carnage if that wasn't the focus of that storyline. And it got, in my memory, that storyline got way overcrowded. I know it's a popular storyline and people really remember it, but because now Carnage was a family of 5, we had to bring in Cloak and Dagger, and I think Iron Fist might have been involved. So suddenly now we had all these supporting characters, and it was hard to keep Spider-Man as the focus of those stories if you wanted to do justice to the other characters. And even the villains shouldn't just be little one-note things that come in and slaughter somebody and leave. They should have some kind of reasonable motivation. I mean, Carnage, in a sense, didn't. It was just to create carnage, and that was simple, but it was a motivation. He just wanted chaos, really. But the other character, you didn't want them all having the same thing. So to do justice in a 22-page story to 5 villains and 5 heroes every issue was complicated. And I can't swear to this. I haven't looked back at that in a while, but I wouldn't be surprised if I minimized my use of Carnage in those stories, because he just wasn't, probably not a character I ever really connected with. I commit very little Carnage in my life, or as little as I can get away with.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I go on and on, but I wrap up with one last question is, you guys are both comic fans. Do you ever take the time to look at what you have done for the industry and the impacts that you have made and said, wow, that's, you know, I really made a big dent in this whole comic book world?
Howard?
I honestly, I'm always surprised by the level of enthusiasm that I receive from fans. Seriously, because for me, this was a job, but a great job. I remember writing a story once, like sitting down at 10 o'clock in the morning, and my wife coming to me at about 6 in the evening and saying, you know, you do have to eat at some point today. And I was with this particular story, I was in the flow. Just so you know, that story never saw print, which is a whole other story, and it does involve Terry, but no, it didn't. It didn't see print because of you, but it's the second Gambit series.
Okay.
I wrote the first issue, and I thought it was the greatest thing I had ever written. And I remember wanting to talk to somebody about it, and I knew nobody was going to be at the office, and so I wound up calling DeMatteis, and he answered the phone. I said, Mark, don't you just ever love doing what we do? And I said, you know, just sit there, and he just started laughing on the other end of the phone. He said, oh, you had one of those, did you? And so that's why it was crushing when it wound up getting rejected. So
shows what you know.
What's that?
Shows what you know.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I go to conventions, and I'm being very honest about this, the night before, or even sometimes the morning before I go to the show, I you know, if my wife is with me, I just say to her, why the hell am I doing this? This nobody's going to be here to see me. Why the hell would they want to see me at this thing? And she's now just started laughing, because I still do it. I've been doing conventions now seriously for the past 7 years, I think. And she just laughs because I'm totally convinced I would show up at these shows and nobody is going to want to see me and say, who? Howard who? And then, and then often I have a line, and that's kind of fun. And people will tell me, what an impact it had. People have tattoos of characters I created. And, and this is a thing that got me through a really rough period in my life. And I'm genuinely shocked by it, because I felt like, and Terry and I have spoken about this, we sometimes feel like we were the luckiest people in the world to have this job that we did, both as editors and then as writers, which was a thing that we did have a real passion for. And it is heartening when I find that did connect with people, but it's always shocking to me still.
My answer to that would be, I don't really look back and think, oh, I created that character and that's a brilliant character and it made lots of people happy and Marvel lots of money. I was, however, and I think I chatted with you about this a little earlier, Oren, I was very well aware when I was on staff at Marvel and writing afterwards that I got such joy as a child out of comic books, and probably an unnatural amount of joy out of comic books when I was a child. But I was very well aware when I was doing that job that I loved the job. I loved the fact that they were paying me for it, even though I would have done it for free. I wasn't telling them that, though.
Yeah, they kind of counted on that early on.
And I love the fact that I got free comic books. I certainly would have done it for the free comic books, but I was very conscious of the fact that, wow, I wonder if I'm bringing some level of joy like that to some kid somewhere. I knew that I felt very privileged about that aspect of it, that I was doing something that hopefully, if I was doing it well enough, mattered to someone. And not everyone can say that about their job. And I was just very conscious of that when I was doing it. That was a big advantage to my job.
And we're back. So I hope you guys enjoyed that Oren Only episode as much as I did. I got to tell you, I love when Oren does these. He really does a great job balancing two people, and really has a great rapport with them. So Oren, great job. Very informative episode.
Thank you very much, Joe. Yes, I think in the Oren Multiverse of Madness, Another World, there's a $1 Bandits with me and Howard and Mr. Kavanagh, but they were so much fun. I'd love to have them back on with you guys because they have so many amazing stories. We only really scratch the surface of all that they've done in their careers.
Yeah, loved hearing this one. Oren, again, hats off. Another great interview with another couple of great guys. So that'll do it for this episode of $1 Bandits. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your frenemies, and we will see you next time.